The Zereth scout ship drifted silently through the void, its dark hull blending into the starless background of space. It was a vessel designed for stealth, its sleek black surface absorbing light and rendering it nearly invisible to all but the most advanced detection systems. The ship's pilot, a tall and slender creature with pale gray skin and 4 elongated limbs, sat motionless in the dim glow of the control panel. Its large, lidless eyes scanned the data feed as the ship approached the blue and green planet below. "Target acquired," the pilot whispered, its voice a low guttural hiss. The Zereth had discovered hundreds of primitive worlds, most of which surrendered without resistance once the superior might of the Empire was revealed. This planet, designated as Sol 3 by the Galactic database, would be no different. The inhabitants were small, biologically weak creatures with no natural armor or enhanced senses, a minor challenge at best. The scout ship descended toward the upper atmosphere, deploying a cloaking field to hide from primitive human satellites. Data streams scrolled across the pilot's vision, showing the planet's crude orbital infrastructure and low-tech communication systems. Pathetic, the pilot thought. Suddenly, the ship's proximity alarms blared. A red warning symbol flashed across the controls. The pilot's head snapped up as the ship's sensors registered an incoming object. Fast and precise. A human vessel. That shouldn't have been possible. Humans weren't supposed to have advanced spacefaring technology, let alone anything capable of tracking a cloaked ship. "Impossible," the pilot muttered, its slender fingers dancing across the console as it tried to adjust the ship's position. The human vessel closed the distance with alarming speed. It was smaller than the scout ship, its surface painted with battle-worn scars. The human ship's thrusters flared as it maneuvered into position just above the Zereth vessel. A comm channel opened. Static buzzed through the link for a moment before a deep human voice cut through the noise. "Identify yourself." The pilot hesitated. Humans were not supposed to have the capability to breach Zereth communication frequencies. "I said identify yourself," the human voice repeated, sharper this time. The pilot narrowed its dark eyes. It activated its own communication relay, allowing the translation system to adjust to the human language. "We are the Zereth Empire," it said coldly. "You are a primitive species. Surrender, and you may yet survive." There was a short silence. Then the human replied with a tone so calm it sent a shiver down the pilot's spine. "You think we're primitive." Before the pilot could respond, the human ship powered up its weapons. The scout ship's sensors registered a spike in energy output, targeted and precise. The pilot's fingers flew across the controls, trying to evade the lock. But the human vessel was faster, more responsive. A searing red beam lanced across the void, striking the scout ship's left wing. The ship lurched violently to one side as the energy shields failed. "Direct hit," the pilot shouted, struggling to stabilize the ship. The human ship drifted into position again, its weapons locking onto the scout ship's main engine core. The pilot's breathing quickened. How could this be happening? Humans weren't supposed to be capable of this level of combat efficiency. The Zereth Empire had analyzed human biology. They lacked the strength, the resilience, the tactical instincts needed to pose a threat to an interstellar species. "Stand down," the human voice ordered over the comlink. The pilot bared its sharpened teeth. "We are the apex species of this galaxy," it snarled. "You cannot possibly." A burst of plasma fire erupted from the human ship's cannons, slamming into the scout ship's engine. The hull screeched as it tore apart. The pilot's console sparked violently, smoke filling the cockpit. Emergency protocols flashed across the pilot's vision, but it was already too late. The scout ship's power core was destabilizing. "Weapons offline," the pilot gasped. "Engines unresponsive." The human ship drifted closer, so close that the pilot could see the markings on its hull through the fractured viewport. A stylized image of a wolf's head, its mouth open in a silent snarl. Predatory. The human's voice came through the comm link one last time, colder than the void itself. You thought you were the hunters. A pause. Welcome to the real galaxy. The human ship's weapons charged for a final shot. The pilot's eyes widened. Fear, true fear, clawed at its mind. It reached for the emergency escape controls, but the human ship fired before it could press the button. The scout ship erupted into a cascade of blue and white energy. The human ship hovered for a moment, its hull reflecting the dying light of the destroyed vessel. Then, with a quiet flare of its engines, it turned and slipped back into the shadows of space. On board the human ship, Commander Marcus Reyes leaned back in his seat, his hands resting on the controls. He watched the fading light of the Zereth ship's destruction through the viewport. Around him, his crew sat in focused silence. They knew what this meant. The Zereth Empire had made contact with humanity, and humanity had responded. "What are your orders, sir?" one of the crew asked. Marcus's expression was unreadable as he stared out into the void. "Inform High Command," he said. "They'll want to know that the hunt has begun." Far across the galaxy, on a cold and distant throne world, the Zereth Emperor watched the transmission from the destroyed scout ship. His dark eyes narrowed as he analyzed the brief recording. The human vessel had moved with an unnatural precision. Their tactics were advanced, ruthless, predatory. The Emperor's advisors murmured in disbelief. "This shouldn't be possible," one of them said. The Emperor's gaze darkened. "We have underestimated them." His voice was sharp and low. This was not an act of defense. This was an act of domination. "What shall we do?" The Emperor's mouth curled into a dangerous smile. "We see how far they are willing to take this. Let the hunt begin." Back on Earth, Commander Reyes stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the stars flicker through the viewport. His hands tightened into fists as he considered what was to come. Humans had been underestimated before. The galaxy had always seen them as weak, primitive, prey. They were wrong. Because humans weren't prey. They were predators. And the hunt was only beginning. The silence of deep space was broken by the rhythmic thrum of powerful engines. The Iron Fang, a Terran warship, sliced through the void with purpose. Its blackened hull absorbed the starlight, cloaked and unseen as it drifted toward the Zereth forward station. Inside the dimly lit command deck, Commander Marcus Reyes stood with arms crossed, his gaze locked on the holographic display. The station was massive. A sprawling web of steel and reinforced plating, bristling with weapon platforms. "Multiple energy signatures," reported Lieutenant Dawson from the sensor console. "They've got patrol ships circling every quadrant." Marcus studied the layout. "They're preparing for something big," he muttered. "Looks like they think they're hunting us." "Guess they didn't like what happened to their scout," Dawson added with a grin. Marcus didn't smile. His mind kept replaying that encounter. The arrogance in the Zereth's voice. The way they'd called humanity primitive. He knew this wasn't just about territory. This was about pride. A war of dominance. "Commander," Ensign Patel called from the comm station. "Signal from High Command. Green light for Operation Predator." Marcus turned sharply. Weapons online. "Load torpedoes." The crew moved with precision, their hands racing over the controls. Rows of missile bays opened along the Iron Fang's underbelly, revealing sleek, warhead-tipped projectiles. Each missile was equipped with high explosive charges, designed not just to kill, but to shatter entire hulls. "Patel," Marcus ordered, "open a comm channel." The soft crackle of static filled the bridge. Marcus's voice dropped to a cold, measured tone. "To the Zereth station," he said. "We know you're watching." A response came almost instantly. The guttural, growling voice of a Zereth officer filled the air. "You are nothing," it sneered. "We will crush your pathetic race. Surrender now, and we may yet allow your species to serve." Marcus clenched his fist. "We're not here to negotiate." "Then you are fools," the Zereth spat. "We are the apex predators of this galaxy. Your destruction is inevitable." Marcus's lips curled in a grim smile. "No," he said. "We are the predators." The channel cut, and Marcus's gaze snapped to his gunnery officer. "Fire!" The Iron Fang erupted with light as torpedoes streaked through the darkness, their engines flaring like furious comets. The first salvo struck the outer hangar bay, detonating with a thunderous blast that rippled across the station's hull. Fire and debris scattered outward, and alarms blared from within the station's corridors. "Direct hit," Dawson called. "Their patrol ships are scrambling." "Bring us around," Marcus barked. "We're not done yet." The Iron Fang twisted through space, skimming the edge of the station's defenses. Bolts of plasma fire streaked past the ship, their green glow illuminating the hull. The human vessel weaved through the storm of energy, its shields flickering but holding firm. Kinetic cannons roared to life, unleashing a torrent of solid metal slugs that tore through the hull of the nearest patrol ship. The Zereth vessel staggered, its engines flickering before a secondary blast ripped it apart. Shattered metal spun away like shrapnel. "Another squadron closing fast," Dawson warned. "Lock torpedoes and fire." Marcus snapped. The next volley screamed through the void, weaving between the approaching Zereth ships. One of the torpedoes struck dead center on the lead vessel's hull. The detonation tore the ship in two, its remains scattering like burning confetti. But more were coming. The station's primary guns were powering up, glowing with deadly crimson light. "Commander," Patil shouted, panic in her voice. "Station weapons are locking on." "Take us below the station," Marcus ordered. "Stay in their blind spot." The Iron Fang dove beneath the massive structure, skimming the jagged plating close enough that the hull groaned from the station's gravitational pull. The enemy's cannons struggled to track them, firing wildly into the void. "Dawson, target their power cores," Marcus ordered. "Aye, sir." Moments later, a new volley of torpedoes launched from the Iron Fang. The projectiles screamed through a narrow gap in the station's structure, a near impossible shot, before striking their mark. The station's power core erupted in a cascade of blue-white fire. Explosions cascaded outward, tearing through bulkheads and shredding the station's interior. One by one, its lights flickered and died. "Massive chain reaction," Dawson called. "That station's going down." "Pull us back," Marcus barked. The Iron Fang surged away from the doomed station as its structure crumpled inward. Fire bloomed across its surface, consuming everything in its path. The surviving Zereth ships scrambled to flee, their formations shattered and disorganized. Marcus's gaze hardened as he watched the destruction unfold. "Patil," he said quietly, "open a channel to High Command." "Yes, sir," she replied. "This is Commander Reyes," Marcus said firmly. "Target eliminated. The Zereth just learned what it's like to be hunted." Back on the Zereth homeworld, the Emperor sat in silence as the transmission played before him. He watched the recording of his station's destruction, his expression dark and cold. The humans had not merely fought back. They had struck with the precision of assassins. They hadn't just destroyed. They had hunted. "They are not what we believe them to be," one of his generals muttered. The Emperor's gaze narrowed. "No," he growled. "They are far worse." In the distant void, the Iron Fang sailed quietly through the stars, cloaked and unseen. Commander Reyes sat alone in his quarters, replaying the battle in his mind. He knew this was only the beginning. The Zereth would return, stronger, angrier, and more prepared. But that was fine. Humans had always thrived when outnumbered. They had always survived when pushed to the brink. Because humans didn't just endure, they adapted. They evolved. And when cornered, humans didn't run. They hunted. The cold hum of the Iron Fang's engines pulsed through the dark corridors of the ship. Marcus Reyes stood in the observation deck, his hands resting on the reinforced glass as he stared into the endless black of deep space. The faint glow of distant stars reflected off his sharp eyes. His jaw was tight, his mind replaying the battle over and over. The destruction of the Zereth station had sent a clear message. Humanity wasn't prey. But Marcus knew it wasn't over. The Zereth wouldn't accept defeat so easily. "Commander," Patel's voice crackled through the intercom. "Incoming transmission. High command." Marcus sighed and turned toward the exit. His boots echoed through the steel-plated hallway as he made his way toward the bridge. When the doors slid open, the holographic image of Admiral Hayes stood waiting, his silver hair neatly combed, his dark uniform pressed with precision. His sharp eyes narrowed at Marcus. "Commander Reyes," Hayes said, his tone cold and measured, "you've made quite a mess." Marcus's expression didn't change. "We took down their forward station and triggered an aggressive response," Hayes replied. "The Zereth have dispatched a battle fleet toward Terran space. They'll arrive in less than 48 hours. Marcus's fists clenched. He had known retaliation was coming. But a full battle fleet. The Zereth were angry. And when predators got angry, they became more dangerous. "What's our response?" Marcus asked. "We can't afford a full-scale war," Hayes said. "High Command wants a surgical strike. Cut off the head of the snake before it bites." Marcus's eyes darkened. "You want us to assassinate their command?" "The Zereth Fleet Master is overseeing the assault from the warship Valkor," Hayes said. Marcus's jaw tightened. The Valkor was one of the most heavily armored warships in the Zereth fleet, a moving fortress with dozens of escort ships. Going after it was suicide. "You think we can breach their defenses?" Marcus asked. "I think," Hayes said, his gaze hard, "that if anyone can do it, it's you." The transmission cut. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the ship's systems. Marcus's gaze dropped to the floor. His instincts screamed at him that this was a trap, that the Zereth were expecting this. But hesitation was not an option. If they didn't strike now, the Terran colonies would burn. He turned toward Patel. "Plot a course toward the Zereth fleet." Patel hesitated. "Commander, that's suicide." Marcus's eyes sharpened. "We're not going to survive this war by playing it safe." Patel swallowed and nodded. "Aye, sir." Marcus made his way toward the armory. The doors slid open with a hiss, revealing rows of black combat suits hanging from steel racks. A few crew members were already suiting up. Sergeant Bonner stood by the weapons locker, his rugged face set in stone. His piercing blue eyes met Marcus. "Going in quiet?" Bonner asked. Marcus shook his head. "No, we want them to know we're coming." Bonner's mouth curved into a hard smile. "Now that's more like it." Marcus suited up, feeling the weight of the reinforced combat armor settle around his shoulders. He secured the magnetic lock of his helmet to his suit, the HUD flickering to life across his vision. His pulse sensed with the suit's internal systems. He grabbed a plasma rifle from the rack and slid it into place on his back. Bonner chuckled. "You think they're ready for this?" "They better be," Marcus said. The Iron Fang emerged from slip space near the outer rim of the Zereth fleet. The Valkor loomed ahead, a monstrous warship, nearly 3 kilometers long. Its dark hull pulsed with faint blue light as plasma cannons lined the sides, flanked by escort ships. Hundreds of them. "Multiple enemy signatures," Paddle said over the comms. "We've been spotted." "Good," Marcus growled. "Drop the cloak." The Iron Fang flickered into view, a dark shadow cutting through the stars. The Zereth ships immediately locked onto it, their cannons glowing with deadly light. "Fire torpedoes," Marcus ordered. The Iron Fang spat out a volley of warheads, the missiles weaving between the escort ships. The first torpedo struck an enemy corvette, shattering its hull in a burst of flame and debris. "Enemy ships are closing," Dawson shouted. "Take us toward the Valkor," Marcus barked. Full power. The Iron Fang surged forward, weaving through the storm of plasma fire. Explosions flared around it as the ship's shields flickered under the assault. Marcus gritted his teeth as the hull shuddered from the impact of a near miss. "We can't hold this position," Dawson shouted. "We're not holding it," Marcus said coldly. "We're breaking through." The iron fang twisted hard, cutting through the formation. Plasma fire streaked past the hull as the ship's cannons roared in response. Another Zereth frigate exploded, its burning remains tumbling through the void. "We've got a clear shot to the Valkor," Patil shouted. "Boarding team, stand by," Marcus called. He turned toward Bonner and the strike team. "Ready." Bonner grinned. "Always." Marcus and the team entered the drop bay. The bay doors slid open, revealing the massive bulk of the Valkor below them. Marcus's heart hammered as the launch countdown began. 3, 2, 1. Drop. The strike team shot out into the void, magnetic boots engaging as they landed hard against the hull of the Valkor. Marcus raised his rifle as the team breached the airlock. The doors hissed open, and they were met with immediate resistance. A squad of Zereth soldiers charged down the corridor, their weapons blazing. Marcus dropped to one knee and fired. The plasma bolt struck the nearest Zereth in the chest, dropping it instantly. Bonner and the others followed suit, their rifles screaming with energy as the corridor became a storm of light and death. "Push forward," Marcus barked. They moved quickly, cutting through the armored hallways of the Valkor. The Zereth fell back, but more kept coming. Marcus's rifle overheated as he fired down the hall, the bolt striking the Zereth soldier in the head. The body collapsed to the floor. "Commander," Bonner shouted. Marcus turned just as a massive Zereth warrior charged him, its claws gleaming with plasma energy. Marcus sidestepped and drove his knife into the creature's throat. Dark blood sprayed across his visor as the creature dropped. They reached the control room. Marcus's hand slammed against the control panel, and the reinforced doors slid open. Inside, the Zereth Fleet Master stood in dark armor, his crimson eyes glaring beneath the ridges of his crown. "You..." Marcus raised his rifle. "And you're not going any further." The Fleet Master's claws unsheathed. "Let's see how human you really are." The Fleet Master lunged. Marcus dodged and fired point-blank. The plasma bolt struck the creature's shoulder, but it didn't slow down. The Fleet Master's claws raked across Marcus's armor, sparks flying. Marcus twisted and drove his knife into the Fleet Master's side. The alien snarled, but Marcus fired his rifle into the wound. The Fleet Master's body convulsed before it collapsed to the floor. Marcus's breath came hard and fast. He keyed his comm. "Target down," he said. "We're done here." As the team retreated toward the extraction point, Marcus glanced back at the fallen Fleet Master. The Predator was dead, but the hunt was far from over. Marcus sat on the edge of the medical bay, feeling the dull ache in his ribs beneath the reinforced armor. His hands were still shaking. The adrenaline from the last mission hadn't fully left his system. The Fleet Master was dead. The Valkor had been crippled and left adrift, but Marcus knew it wasn't over. Across from him, Bonner was sitting on the med table, getting his left arm patched up by the medtech. A long burn mark ran from his shoulder to his elbow where a plasma shot had nearly torn his arm off. Bonner winced as the medtech applied the regen gel, but his face was calm. "Any word from High Command?" Bonner asked. Marcus shook his head. "They're still analyzing the damage." Bonner let out a low breath. "We hit them hard, Marcus. That should have bought us some time." "Maybe," Marcus said, his voice hard. "But you don't corner a predator without consequences." As if on cue, Paddle's voice crackled over the intercom. "Commander, you're needed on the bridge. Now." Marcus pushed off the bench, ignoring the protest from his bruised ribs. Bonner slid off the table and followed him. They moved quickly through the narrow corridors of the Iron Fang, passing crew members who stood at attention as they passed. When they entered the bridge, Paddle's face was pale. "We've got incoming," Paddle said. Marcus stepped toward the tactical display. The hologram showed a cluster of red blips moving toward Terran space. Fast. How many ships? Marcus asked. 30, maybe more, Paddle said. Capital-class warships, carriers, and at least 2 dreadnoughts. Marcus's eyes narrowed. That wasn't a response. That was an extermination fleet. ETA? Marcus asked. Less than 12 hours, Paddle said. Marcus's jaw tightened. He had been right. Killing the fleet master had only made things worse. The Zereth weren't just angry. They were coming to wipe humanity off the map. Patel hesitated. Commander, there's more. Marcus's gaze darkened. What? They've deployed a weapon, Paddle said. A planet killer. Marcus's stomach turned cold. Explain. It's a neutron burst cannon, Paddle said, mounted on the dreadnought Savath. It's capable of destroying a planet's atmosphere in a single shot. Marcus's chest tightened. Targets. Patel's eyes flicked toward the display. Earth. The room fell into a heavy silence. Bonner cursed under his breath. Marcus's mind raced. Earth was heavily defended. But against a weapon like that, the planetary shield wouldn't last more than a few minutes. If that cannon fired, billions of lives would be erased in seconds. What's the plan? Bonner asked. Marcus's gaze sharpened. We stop the Savath before it gets into firing range. Bonner scoffed. You mean charge straight into a death fleet? Marcus's lips curled into a hard smile. Something like that. Commander, Paddle said, his voice tight. That's suicide. If we don't stop that weapon, Marcus said, there won't be a tomorrow. Patel hesitated. The Savath will be heavily guarded. Then we hit them harder, Marcus said. He turned toward Bonner. Gear up. Full assault loadout. Bonner grinned. Now you're talking. 30 minutes later, the strike team was suited up in the armory. Black combat armor glinted under the dim lights as the team loaded up their weapons. Marcus checked his plasma rifle and slid his knife into the holster on his thigh. Team, listen up, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the chatter. The Zereth are bringing a planet killer. If they reach Earth, it's over. We're going to hit the Savath head-on. Disable the weapon, cripple the ship, and get the hell out. He stepped forward, his gaze hard. We've beaten the odds before. We'll do it again. Humans don't break. The strike team nodded as Bonner stepped up beside Marcus. What's the extraction plan? Marcus's smile was grim. We'll figure that out when we're done. The team boarded the dropship, the doors sealing behind them. The engines hummed as the ship detached from the Iron Fang and accelerated toward the Zereth fleet. Through the viewport, the enemy armada loomed, dark shapes against the stars. Enemy ships are locking on. Paddle's voice crackled over the comms. Marcus braced himself. Hold course. The dropship shuddered as plasma bolts streaked past it, illuminating the cockpit with white-blue light. Marcus felt the impact as one bolt clipped the wing. We're not going to make it, the pilot shouted. Marcus keyed the comms. Patel, cover us. The Iron Fang unleashed a barrage of plasma fire. Explosions ripped through the enemy formation as 2 corvettes crumbled under the assault. The path cleared for a moment. Just enough. Go, Marcus shouted. The dropship shot toward the Savath. The docking clamps engaged with a metallic groan as the airlock slid open. Marcus and the team rushed inside. The Zereth were waiting. A hail of plasma fire screamed through the air. Marcus dropped to one knee and returned fire. Bonner's rifle roared beside him as the team pushed forward, cutting down the Zereth soldiers in their path. Down the hall, Marcus barked. They stormed through the ship's corridors, leaving bodies behind. Marcus's rifle hissed as it overheated. He drew his knife and drove it into the throat of the Zereth soldier. The creature collapsed in a spray of dark blood. They reached the cannon chamber. The massive weapon loomed before them, dark metal lined with glowing blue conduits. Zereth engineers stood at the controls. Clear them out, Marcus shouted. The strike team opened fire. Plasma bolts tore through the engineers, their bodies falling to the floor. Marcus approached the control panel and pulled a charge from his belt. "I'm setting the detonation sequence," Marcus said. Bonner stood at his side. 2 minutes to evac. Marcus's fingers flew over the panel as alarms blared around them. A massive explosion rocked the ship as the Iron Fang fired on the exterior hull. Suddenly, a dark shadow appeared at the far side of the room. A Zereth commander, nearly 8 feet tall, wearing dark crimson armor, stepped into the chamber. His eyes glowed faintly beneath the helmet. "You've come far, human," the commander growled. Marcus raised his rifle. "Not far enough." The commander charged. Marcus fired. The plasma bolt struck the commander's shoulder, but it barely slowed him down. The Zereth swiped out with a massive clawed hand. Marcus ducked, but the strike clipped his shoulder, knocking him to the ground. Bonner opened fire, striking the commander in the chest. The commander staggered, just for a moment. It was enough. Marcus pulled his knife and lunged forward. He drove the blade into the commander's neck, twisting hard. The commander's eyes widened, and then went dark. The body collapsed. Marcus pushed himself to his feet. The charge on the cannon began to pulse with red light. "Marcus," Bonner shouted, "we have to go." Marcus keyed his comm. "Patel, we need extraction. Now." They sprinted down the corridor. Explosions shook the ship as the Iron Fang's cannons hammered the hull. The dropship's doors slid open. Marcus and the team jumped inside as the pilot lifted off. Through the viewport, Marcus watched the Savath shudder and break apart. Fire blossomed along its hull as the cannon exploded, tearing the dreadnought apart from within. Marcus sank into the seat, his chest heaving. He looked at Bonner. "We stopped it," Bonner said. Marcus's gaze darkened. "For now." Marcus stood on the bridge of the Iron Fang, staring at the wreckage of the Savath through the viewport. The massive Zereth dreadnought was now nothing more than a burning husk drifting through the void. Jagged pieces of twisted metal floated around it, glowing from the heat of the explosions. The weapon was gone. The planet killer was destroyed. But the battle wasn't over. "Commander," Paddle said, his voice tight, "we've got a problem." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Patel's hands flew across the tactical console. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the Zereth fleet reorganizing into attack formations. The red blips on the screen outnumbered the blue human markers 10-1. "They're regrouping," Paddle said. "Looks like they're preparing for a full assault." Marcus's jaw tightened. "How many ships?" "At least 50 warships," Paddle said, "including 2 more dreadnoughts." Marcus's stomach turned cold. The destruction of the Savath hadn't scared them off. It had only pissed them off. The Zereth weren't retreating. They were coming back with everything they had. Bonner stood at Marcus's side, his face grim. "We've got nothing left, Marcus. Half our fleet is down. Shields are at 30%. We're running on fumes." Marcus's gaze hardened. "We still have one thing left." Bonner raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Marcus's eyes darkened. "Us." He turned toward Patel. A moment later, the holographic form of Admiral Hensley appeared, his expression as cold and severe as always. "Commander," Hensley said, "I'm seeing the same thing you are." Marcus's voice was steady. "They're coming for Earth." Hensley's mouth tightened. "Reinforcements are already en route, but they won't make it in time." "Then we hold the line," Marcus said. Hensley's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting we make a last stand?" Marcus's jaw set. "We don't have a choice." Hensley studied him for a moment, then gave a single nod. "Understood. You'll have full operational authority." The transmission cut out. Marcus turned toward Patel. "How long until they're in range?" 10 minutes, Paddle said. Marcus took a deep breath. "Patch me through to the fleet." Patel's fingers danced across the console. A red light blinked on the communications display. Marcus took a step forward. "This is Commander Marcus Holt to all Terran forces," Marcus said, his voice echoing through the fleet. "We're outnumbered, outgunned. The enemy thinks we're weak. They think humanity will break." Marcus's gaze sharpened. "They're wrong." His voice rose. "We've fought too hard. We've lost too much. Humanity doesn't surrender. We fight. If we're going down today, we're taking them with us." He paused, his gaze dark. "Make them bleed." Bonner grinned. "That'll get them fired up." Marcus turned toward Patel. "Load all forward batteries. Target their command ships." Patel hesitated. "Marcus, we don't have enough firepower." "I know," Marcus said. "That's why we're going to ram them." Bonner's eyes widened. "You're serious?" Marcus's lips curled into a cold smile. "Dead serious." Patel's hands tightened on the console. "A direct collision will overload the reactor." Marcus's gaze darkened. "That's the idea." The alarms sounded as the Zereth fleet closed in. Red lights flared across the bridge as the targeting systems locked onto the approaching enemy ships. The Iron Fang's engines hummed with raw power as the ship accelerated. The Zereth dreadnoughts opened fire first. Plasma bolts streaked through the darkness, slamming into the human fleet. A nearby Terran frigate exploded in a flash of white-blue light, its hull splitting apart. "Shields at 20%, Patel shouted. "Hold course," Marcus barked. The Iron Fang's forward batteries lit up. Plasma fire streaked toward the nearest Zereth command ship. The enemy ship's shields flared as the bolts struck home, but it held position, undeterred. Bonner gripped the back of the pilot's chair. "They're not breaking." Marcus's eyes were cold. "Then we break them." The Iron Fang surged forward, engines roaring. The hull trembled under the force. Marcus's hands curled into fists as the Zereth dreadnought loomed ahead. The targeting system screamed as the ship locked onto the enemy's central command tower. "Impact in 60 seconds, Patel shouted. "Brace," Marcus shouted. The Iron Fang's main cannons fired again, sending bolts of plasma hammering into the Zereth ship's shields. The dreadnought returned fire. The impact rocked the ship. Sparks erupted from the consoles. 30 seconds, Patel yelled. Bonner grinned. Hell of a way to go out. Marcus's gaze was steady. "We're not going out." Patel's eyes widened as new blue markers appeared on the display. "Commander," Patel shouted. "Incoming jump signatures." Marcus's head whipped toward the display. More blue markers, dozens of them, appearing on the edge of the battlefield. "It's the reinforcements," Patel shouted. Human capital ships and frigates burst into real space, their engines glowing. The lead ship, the Hammer of Dawn, fired its main batteries. A beam of white-hot energy lanced across the battlefield, tearing through the side of the nearest Zereth cruiser. "They made it," Bonner shouted. Marcus's gaze sharpened. Change of plans. The Iron Fang pulled up hard, its engine screaming as it narrowly avoided slamming into the dreadnought. Plasma fire erupted across the battlefield as the human fleet joined the fray. "Target their engines," Marcus shouted. The Iron Fang's cannons blazed. The Zereth dreadnought's rear thrusters exploded in a shower of flame and debris. The ship began to list, smoke trailing from its hull. Patel's fingers flew across the console. "Commander, they're retreating." Marcus's eyes narrowed. The Zereth fleet began to pull back. The battered remains of the enemy fleet turned away from the battlefield, their engines burning as they disappeared into the void. Bonner laughed. "We did it." Marcus's gaze remained hard. Not yet. The Zereth ships vanished from the tactical display, leaving behind the shattered remains of the human fleet. Marcus exhaled slowly, his body trembling from the adrenaline crash. Patel's voice broke the silence. The holographic display flickered to life. Admiral Hensley's face appeared, his expression uncharacteristically calm. "Commander Holt," Hensley said, Outstanding work. Marcus's mouth tightened. It's not over. Hensley's gaze sharpened. What do you mean? Marcus's jaw clenched. The Zerath don't run unless they're regrouping. Hensley's eyes darkened. Then we'll be ready. The transmission cut out. Marcus turned toward the viewport. The battlefield was littered with burning wreckage, both human and Zerath. The cost had been high, too high. Bonner stepped up beside him. What's next? Marcus's gaze was cold. We hunt them. Bonner smiled faintly. Dan right. Marcus's hand curled into a fist. The war wasn't over. Humanity had survived the first strike. But the next battle was coming. And this time, humanity would be ready. Marcus stood at the edge of the command deck, staring into the cold void of space. The debris field stretched out before him, a graveyard of shattered Zerath warships and broken human vessels. The battle was over, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the chaos of war. The price of survival had been steep. Thousands of lives lost, ships reduced to wreckage. But humanity had survived. Patel's voice broke the quiet hum of the bridge. Commander, the remaining Zerath ships have left the sector. No signs of reinforcements. Marcus's gaze didn't shift. They'll be back. Bonner stepped up beside him, arms crossed over his chest. His face was bruised and streaked with dried blood, but his eyes still carried that spark of defiance. Let them come, he said. We'll be ready. Marcus's jaw tightened. They underestimated us once. They won't make that mistake again. Patel's console beeped. Commander, incoming transmission from High Command. The holographic display flickered to life, and Admiral Hensley's image appeared. The Admiral's usually cold expression softened, just slightly. Commander Holt, Hensley said, congratulations. You've given humanity its first real victory against the Zerath. Marcus's eyes remained cold. It's not over. No, Hensley said. But you've changed the balance of power. The Zerath thought they were the apex predators of this galaxy. His gaze sharpened. Now they know better. Marcus didn't answer. Hensley's image faded, leaving only the soft glow of the tactical display. Patil turned toward Marcus. Orders, sir. Marcus's eyes darkened. Prepare the fleet for repairs. We're not finished yet. Patel hesitated. You think they'll retaliate? Marcus's lips curled into a faint smile. They have to. They can't afford to let this stand. Bonner chuckled. Marcus's gaze sharpened. We're not just fighting to survive anymore. We've proven we can win. Now we fight to finish it. The bridge fell silent for a moment. The weight of their victory, and the cost of it, hung heavy in the air. But beneath that weight, there was something else. A spark, a quiet, burning defiance. Marcus turned toward Patel. Status on the other surviving ships. 5 destroyers and 2 cruisers still operational, Patel said. 3 more ships need heavy repairs. Crew casualties? Marcus asked. Patel's gaze fell. 18,000 confirmed dead. Several thousand more missing. Marcus's throat tightened. He forced himself to stay steady. He couldn't afford to let the weight of it show. Not yet. Send recovery teams, Marcus said. Get our people home. Patel nodded and turned back to his console. Marcus stepped toward the viewport. The debris field stretched on endlessly, pieces of hull and shattered Zerath ships drifting like ghosts. A flicker of movement caught his eye. A small escape pod, spinning slowly through the wreckage. Patel, Marcus said. Scan that pod. Patel's fingers flew across the console. No life signs. Marcus's gaze hardened. Bring it aboard. Bonner frowned. What are you thinking? Marcus didn't answer. Moments later, the pod was pulled into the ship's docking bay. Marcus, Bonner, and Patel arrived as the pod was carefully opened by a recovery team. A thin haze of frost spilled out as the hatch slid back. Inside lay the broken body of a Zerath soldier, its dark carapace shattered, one arm completely severed. The soldier's chest rose and fell faintly. Bonner's hand went to his sidearm. "It's still alive." "Barely," Paddle said. Marcus stepped forward. The Zareth's eyes fluttered open. The dark pits of its gaze locked onto Marcus. Its mandibles trembled. Marcus knelt beside it. "You lost," Marcus said coldly. The Zareth's mouth clicked weakly. A broken sound escaped its throat. Marcus leaned closer. "How does it feel?" The Zareth's gaze darkened. "You are dangerous." Marcus's eyes flashed. "You have no idea." The Zareth's chest rose one last time. Then it stilled. Its gaze went glassy. Marcus stood. Bonner's hand rested on his weapon. "What was that about?" Marcus's gaze hardened. "They're scared." Patel's brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" Marcus's gaze darkened. "They thought they were hunting us." His jaw set. "Now they know we're the predators." The bridge of the Iron Fang was quiet as Marcus returned. The surviving ships of the human fleet were already regrouping. The remaining wreckage of the Zareth fleet drifted through the void, evidence of humanity's strength. Bonner leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. "So, what happens now?" Marcus's gaze sharpened. "We take the fight to them." Bonner raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about a counterattack." Marcus's eyes were cold. "We're not prey anymore." Patel's hands tightened on the console. "That's a hell of a risk." Marcus's gaze darkened. "We've shown them we can survive. Now we show them we can win." The tactical display flickered. Marcus's eyes narrowed as the galactic map expanded, showing the nearest Zareth-controlled systems. Red lines marked the edges of their territory. Marcus's lips curled into a thin smile. "Set course for Zareth Prime." Bonner's eyes widened. "You're serious?" Marcus's gaze burned with cold intensity. "They hunted us." His voice hardened. "Now it's our turn." The Iron Fang's engines hummed as the ship turned toward the stars. The surviving human fleet followed in formation. The light of the burning battlefield faded behind them as the ships disappeared into the depths of space. Marcus stood at the center of the bridge, his gaze steady. Humanity had been prey for too long. The galaxy had been ruled by the strong, the dominant, the unchallenged. But now the galaxy had seen what humanity was capable of. The humans weren't